Some cars are rare, some are fast. And then, there's the 1967 L88 Corvette. This beast wasn't just fast, it was too fast. So fast, in fact, that racing officials didn't want it anywhere near their tracks. Why? Because this car was a rule breaker, a record shatterer, a mechanical menace in a sea of polite sports cars. It was never built for the average Sunday cruise or the occasional street race. This machine was born with a very different purpose: to dominate everything in its path. Today, we're diving into a piece of automotive history so wild, so controversial, and so mind-blowingly powerful that it was effectively banned from competition. The 1967 L88 Corvette wasn't just a car, it was a statement, a legend. And unless you've been deep in the classic car world, there's a good chance you've never heard the full story behind this American monster. So buckle up, because this isn't just a story about a car, it's about one of the greatest performance machines ever built and how it scared the racing world straight. A silent killer, GM's secret weapon. When Chevrolet unveiled the L88 Corvette in 1967, it didn't come with flashing lights or massive advertising campaigns. There were no TV commercials boasting about its horsepower. In fact, General Motors intentionally downplayed the L88. Why? Because this wasn't your average Corvette. It was a race car disguised as a street car. The L88 package came loaded with the kind of features that only hardcore racers would appreciate. Under the hood sat a massive 427 cubic inch V8 engine, officially rated at 430 horsepower. But here's the kicker. That was a lie. GM underrated the engine's actual output to keep it under the radar. In reality, it was pushing well over 550 horsepower, and some say closer to 600. This wasn't a vehicle meant for city cruising or long highway drives. It had no radio, no air conditioning, no heater, and even no choke for cold starts. Everything that added comfort was removed. This car was stripped down to the essentials: performance, speed, and raw power. It was a silent killer on the track, and if you were lucky enough to drive one, you'd know immediately that this wasn't your everyday Corvette. Banned by intent. The FIA's problem with the L88. Now let's get into the juicy part, the banning of the L88 from racing. You see, when the L88 showed up on racetracks, it started leaving its competition in the dust. And the powers that be, they didn't like that one bit. The Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile, which governs much of global motorsports, refused to homologate the L88 for international racing. What does that mean? In simple terms, the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile wouldn't let it race in certain classes because it was too powerful and didn't meet the production requirements. The L88 was too limited in number to be considered a mass-produced car, which meant it couldn't qualify for most GT classes. So even though it was a production car, you could technically walk into a dealer and buy one. It was treated like a full-blown prototype. The racing world was rattled. The L88 had started tearing through the competition at events like the Daytona 24 Hours in Sebring, proving it could take on the best Europe had to offer. And that made it a threat. A big one. So instead of letting the L88 take over, the rulebooks got rewritten. If that doesn't scream legendary, what does? Now tell me this. How often do you hear about a production car being banned because it's too good? Born to dominate, track performance like no other. On the racetrack, the L88 was a certified monster. Every inch of it was designed to win. The car featured forged pistons, a solid lifter camshaft, and aluminum heads to reduce weight and increase efficiency. The carburetor, a massive 850 CFM Holley built to feed this hungry beast all the fuel it could handle. Even the cooling system was overkill, designed for endurance racing. We're talking about a heavy-duty radiator and an oil cooler built to handle punishing conditions. The suspension was stiff, the brakes were massive, and the gearbox was a close-ratio M22 Rock Crusher 4-speed manual, an absolute legend in its own right. On the track, the L88 didn't whisper. It roared. Drivers described it as wild and unruly, a car that demanded respect. If you didn't know what you were doing, the L88 would happily punish you. But in the hands of a skilled driver, this Corvette was unstoppable. It wasn't just fast in a straight line. It could corner, grip, and blast past Porsches and Ferraris like they were standing still. It's the kind of performance that made fans roar and competitors sweat. And once you saw one in action, you'd never forget it. The myth of 430 horsepower. Let's go back to that funny little number. 430 horsepower. That's what Chevrolet claimed the L88 made. But every gearhead, every mechanic, and every racer who got near one knew the truth. That number was a joke. In fact, GM deliberately understated the L88's performance. Why? Because they didn't want just anyone to buy it. They didn't want some rich businessman buying one for Sunday drives and crashing it the next week. The L88 was a race car for racers, not for posers. Dyno tests conducted by private owners and race teams revealed the L88 could produce between 550 and 600 horsepower when properly tuned. That kind of output in 1967, that was unheard of. You were talking about performance that rivaled race cars that cost twice as much. And it wasn't just about numbers. The L88's power-to-weight ratio gave it an edge few cars could match. This myth of 430 horsepower has become part of the L88's legend. It's a lie that turned into one of the most iconic truths in muscle car history. And when you stomped on the throttle, the car didn't just accelerate, it launched like a missile. Production numbers, rarer than rare. Here's where the story gets even crazier. Despite all this performance, all this legend, and all this history, only 20 L88 Corvettes were built in 1967. That's it. 20. These cars weren't on every corner. You couldn't just walk in and find one. You had to know someone, or be someone special, to get your hands on an L88. Most buyers were connected to racing teams, had insider knowledge, or were specifically recommended for the program. Chevrolet wasn't handing out L88s to everyone. These weren't collector cars back then. They were tools. Weapons. You bought one to race, not to polish and parade. Today, those 20 cars have become some of the most valuable Corvettes in existence. One sold at auction for over $3.8 million. And that's not even the ceiling. Every L88 that pops up today is immediately surrounded by collectors, investors, and historians. It's not just a car, it's an artifact. And because so few exist, each one has its own story. Some were raced hard and survived. Others were tucked away in barns for decades before being rediscovered. But they all share the same DNA. Raw, unfiltered power, and the kind of heritage that only legends are made of. Outlaw DNA. Why the L88 wasn't street-friendly. Let's be honest. The L88 Corvette was barely street legal. Yes, you could buy one through a dealer, and yes, you could register it. But that's about where the street car concept ends. This thing was about as tame as a caged lion. There was no radio. No A/C. No creature comforts. Heck, it barely liked idling below 2,000 RPM. It guzzled high-octane fuel, the kind you couldn't just pump from a regular gas station. In fact, Chevrolet put a warning sticker on the car that said it required 103 octane fuel. That's race gas, folks, not your everyday pump blend. On top of that, the solid lifter cam and aggressive timing meant it idled like a wild animal and had zero patience for city traffic. It would overheat, stall, and shake like it was trying to break free. It wasn't just uncomfortable, it was borderline unhinged on public roads. But that's what made it magical. The L88 was a street-legal race car in the loosest sense. If you had the guts to drive it on the street, you were in for a ride that was equal parts thrilling and terrifying. And that's why people still talk about it like it was carved from stone by Zeus himself. The L88 versus the world. How it dominated global rivals. It's one thing to build a fast car. It's another to create something that puts global heavyweights on notice. The L88 Corvette didn't just run with the best of them. It flat out embarrassed some of Europe's most respected performance machines. Ferrari, Porsche, Jaguar, all had to take a step back when this American thunderstorm hit the track. In races like Daytona, Sebring, and Le Mans, the L88 held its own against the likes of the Ferrari 275 GTB, the Porsche 911, and the Jaguar E-Type, cars that were supposed to be unbeatable in their class. But when the green flag dropped, the L88's combination of brutal acceleration and superior straight-line speed gave it a clear advantage. It wasn't always the most refined. It wasn't the lightest. But it didn't matter. It was built to take punishment and throw it right back. In fact, many European teams were taken aback by the Corvette's pace. It disrupted the narrative that American cars couldn't handle corners or compete internationally. The L88 didn't care about stereotypes. It broke them. And every time it finished a race, it proved that American muscle wasn't just about drag strips and burnouts. It could take the world stage and crush the competition. Quick challenge for the true fans out there. Can you name a European car from the 60s that could match the L88 in raw track presence? Drop your pick in the comments and let's start a debate. The engine that built a legend. The L88 427 Big Block. At the heart of the L88 lies one of the most famous engines ever to come out of General Motors. The 427 cubic inch, 7.0 liters, L88 Big Block V8. This wasn't just a bored-out motor with a fancy label. It was an engineering marvel, purpose-built for annihilation. Designed with race-duty internals, the L88 engine used forged steel crankshafts, forged pistons, high-flow aluminum heads, and a monstrous Holley 850 CFM carburetor mounted on a high-rise intake manifold. But it wasn't just about what was inside. It was about how it all worked together. The high compression ratio, a brutal 12.5 to 1, meant this beast couldn't run on regular fuel. It needed the kind of race gas that melted eyebrows. Combined with the wild camshaft profile and aggressive valve timing, this engine wasn't friendly, but it was ferociously effective. The engine revved like a monster and screamed with authority under throttle. You didn't just drive an L88, you clung to it. The engine felt alive, almost as if it had a pulse of its own. And when it hit the sweet spot in the power bend, it surged forward like it had been kicked by a rocket. This wasn't just another V8. It was the soul of the L88. And it's the reason why this Corvette was never forgotten, never duplicated, and never tamed. The legacy that refuses to die. Decades later, the 1967 L88 Corvette still sends shockwaves through the car world. Every time one rolls across an auction block, hearts race. Not just because of its rarity, but because of what it represents. A time when American muscle pushed the limits without apology. The L88 helped shape what performance cars could be. It forced other manufacturers to step up. It inspired generations of gearheads, racers, and dreamers. And most importantly, it reminded everyone that rules are sometimes made to be broken. Even today, Corvette fans debate whether the L88 was the greatest of all time. And it's hard to argue against it. With its unmatched power, limited production, outlaw reputation, and racing pedigree, it checks every box. It's not just a fast car, it's a legend wrapped in fiberglass and thunder. So next time you see a classic Vette, ask yourself, is it an L88? If it is, you're staring at one of the most ferocious, misunderstood, and absolutely glorious machines ever to come out of Detroit. If you're still with me, here's a quick question for you. If you could take one legendary car for a spin, any car in history, would you have the guts to drive the L88? Let me know down in the comments and tell me what you think of this absolute monster of a machine. Until next time, remember, Some legends live in the spotlight, but the best ones, they leave behind tire marks, broken records, and a roar that echoes through time. Drive fast, drive smart, and never forget the beasts that paved the way.